A doctor leaned across the counter at the pharmacy, close enough that her badge nearly touched my jacket, and said the words so quietly I thought I'd misheard them. "Do not take that medication tonight. Whatever they give you, palm it, hide it, flush it, but do not swallow it." I froze with the little white bag halfway into my coat pocket. My daughter was waiting in the car outside, engine running, and she had personally walked me in here 20 minutes ago, her arm looped through mine like I might blow away in the wind. I had 30 seconds before she came looking for me. 30 seconds to decide whether the woman in the white coat was having some kind of breakdown or whether she was the only honest person left in my life. I don't know what made my hand close around that bag and nod like I understood, like this was completely normal. But something older than reason took over, and by the time my daughter pushed through the pharmacy door asking what was taking so long, I was already smiling and saying the wait was almost over. 3 days later, sitting in a lawyer's office with a folder of evidence spread across the desk, I finally understood exactly what that pharmacist had risked to save my life, and exactly what my own daughter had been building toward for the better part of a year. My name is Walter Braddock. I'm 67 years old, and until I retired I spent 38 years as a structural engineer, the kind who gets called out to a bridge or a parking garage when something starts making a sound it shouldn't. My whole career was built on one habit. When something doesn't look right, you don't assume it'll hold, you go find the crack. I've applied that habit to steel and concrete my entire adult life. I never imagined I'd need to apply it to my own family. I live outside Scranton, Pennsylvania, in the same brick colonial I bought the year my daughter Denise was born. My wife passed 11 years ago, cancer, slow and cruel, and Denise moved back in with me about 10 months before all this started, her and her husband Craig, after his contracting business folded and their apartment lease ran out. I told myself I was glad for the company. An old man rattling around alone in 4 bedrooms doesn't need much convincing to welcome his own daughter home, even when something about the arrangement never quite settled right in my chest. For those first few months, it was almost pleasant. Craig fixed the gutter, Denise repainted the guest bathroom, we ate dinner together most nights, and I told myself this was what family was supposed to look like in the last stretch of a man's life. But somewhere in there, the temperature in that house started to shift. So gradually, I couldn't have told you the day it happened. It was like watching a slow leak in a foundation. You don't see the crack form. You just notice one day that the door doesn't close right anymore. It was a Tuesday evening in March when Denise knocked on my study door with a softness in her knock I hadn't heard in years. Craig stood behind her in the hallway, hands jammed in his pockets, doing that thing where a man looks at everything in a room except the person he's supposed to be talking to. "Dad," Denise said, in a voice sanded smooth at the edges, "we want to do something for you, something nice." "Before what?" I asked. Because 38 years of reading construction crews had taught me that when somebody softens their voice like that, they're bracing you for a load you haven't agreed to carry yet. Craig finally looked up and said we'd been thinking about a trip, just the 3 of us, someplace warm, someplace with a beach, because didn't I always talk about wanting to see the Gulf Coast before I got too old to enjoy it? I set my newspaper down slowly, because that same old trick still buys you a few seconds of thinking time even at 67. "When would this be?" I asked. "Next week," Denise said. "A little too fast." "Everything's already arranged, Dad. Flights, the resort, all of it. We just need you to say yes." That night at dinner, Craig poured wine with hands that weren't quite steady, and Denise served a pot roast she hadn't cooked in years, moving through my kitchen with a strange new ownership that made the hair on my arms stand up. Between one bite and the next, she said it, casual as weather. "Dad, that life insurance policy through the county, it's still active, right? The one from your engineering firm? 240,000, isn't it?" My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. "How do you know that number?" I asked. "Craig mentioned it once," she said, cutting her potatoes into small, identical squares. "Just conversation." I looked at my son-in-law, and he studied his plate like it held the answer to a test he hadn't studied for. And something in the back of my skull, the same instinct that used to tell me a beam was carrying more than its rated load, said clearly, "That number does not belong in this conversation." So I ran a small test of my own. I mentioned, almost offhand, that my blood pressure had been doing something strange lately, spiking at night, leaving me dizzy. I watched my son-in-law's face for one unguarded half-second, and what I saw there was not concern. It was something closer to interest. Then he caught himself, quick as a man, remembering his line in a play, and said I should really get that checked out. Denise cut in smoothly, telling him not to worry, that I was probably just dehydrated from the heat. Later that night, I found the trip confirmation printed on the kitchen counter. Already paid, my seat already booked, dated for the following Thursday. They had been certain of my yes before they'd ever bothered asking the question. I sat alone in my study past midnight with an old photograph of Denise at 6 years old, gap-toothed, riding on my shoulders at a county fair, and I let myself grieve for a long moment, because 38 years of engineering had taught me one law that never fails. Every structure under stress eventually shows you exactly where it's going to fail. By morning, I'd made my decision in the dark. I would go on this trip. I would watch. I would document everything, the way I'd document a hairline crack before it became a headline. When Craig knocked on my door the next morning, asking if I was excited for the beach, I told him I couldn't wait, and I watched relief flood his face, followed by something underneath it that wasn't warmth at all. It was anticipation. I packed my suitcase with care that morning, and when I got to my pill organizer, I paused, hearing Denise's voice in my head insisting I was just dehydrated. And on some old instinct I couldn't fully explain, I moved every one of my medications into my carry-on bag instead of my checked luggage. A small precaution. The kind that looks paranoid right up until the moment it doesn't. The drive to the airport told its own story to anyone keeping notes. Craig gripped the wheel with white knuckles the entire way, and Denise typed messages on her phone and deleted the threads the instant she sent them, her face wearing a flat, calculating stillness I'd started to think of as her working expression. "Excited, Dad?" Craig asked, and his voice cracked slightly on the word. "Should I be?" I said. He missed it completely. We drove past the elementary school where Denise learned to read, past the Little League field where I coached for 6 summers, and with every mile the pressure behind my ribs grew heavier, and it wasn't my heart doing it. It was information arriving faster than I could process it. At the gate, their boarding group was called first, and they walked down that jetway without a single glance back at me, leaving me standing among strangers with my suitcase handle biting into my palm. If you've ever stood in a crowd and realized the people who are supposed to be yours have already stopped checking to see if you're still there, you know that particular feeling isn't loneliness. It's data. When my own group was finally called, I walked down that same jetway slowly, feeling the strange finality of that narrow tunnel between solid ground and a sealed metal tube, and I stepped into the recycled air of the aircraft. That's when a pharmacist, not a flight attendant this time, but a woman I later learned had been asked by airport medical services to double-check a passenger's prescriptions before departure, approached me at my row with a clipboard, her badge, reading Dr. Renee Okafor. Her professional smile held steady until she leaned close, pretending to verify my ticket number, and her breath touched my ear with 4 words that stopped my heart cold. "Something's wrong with your pills." I stood frozen in the aisle. 11 rows ahead, Denise and Craig sat with their heads bent together over a single phone screen. Was this some kind of mistake? Some airline policy I'd never heard of? I took one step toward my seat, and Dr. Okafor appeared again at my elbow, and this time her professional mask had cracked clean through. Her fingers closed around my sleeve, and they were shaking. "Sir," she whispered, "I need you to trust me and get off this plane right now." I looked into her eyes, and I want to tell you exactly what I saw there, because it decided everything that followed. Not confusion, not overreaction. Fear. The very specific fear of someone who has just learned something they cannot unknow. "You're certain?" I asked quietly. "I have never been more certain of anything," she said. And from up the aisle, I heard my son-in-law's voice call out, "Everything okay back there, Walter?" with an edge in it that had nothing to do with concern. I made my decision the way you make a decision at the top of a scaffold when you feel it start to give. No debate, pure reflex. My hand went to my chest, my knees buckled, and I said, "My heart, something's wrong with my heart," and I let myself go down into the aisle. The fear in my voice was completely real, only the collapse was staged. The cabin erupted around me, professional and urgent, hands under my arms, a wheelchair summoned, voices layered over one another, and through every second of it, I kept my eyes working, because here is the moment I will carry with me until I die. I looked up the aisle at my daughter and her husband, and in the half-second before they arranged their faces for the crowd around them, I saw it plainly. Not fear for my life. Disappointment. The specific look of 2 people watching an experiment fail to produce the result they'd been counting on. Then Craig half rose from his seat, catching himself, softening his face into concern a beat too late, calling out, "Dad, should we come with you?" A crew member blocked the aisle, and told him to stay seated, that medical personnel were already on the way. And as they wheeled me backward toward the jetway, I heard Denise's voice, low, meant only for her husband, but carrying in that strange hush that follows any emergency. This ruins everything. And my son-in-law hissed back, not here. I want to pause on that moment, one breath, because some of you listening tonight have lived some version of it yourselves. If you've ever caught, in the face of someone you love, one flash of the wrong emotion, relief where there should have been grief, irritation where there should have been fear, and then watched it disappear so fast you told yourself you'd imagined it, I promise you, you didn't imagine it. That flash is the only honest thing in the whole performance. Everything that comes after it is theater. They set me up in the airport medical office, where a paramedic checked my vitals, found them excellent, guessed anxiety, and left me alone under fluorescent lights. Through a small window, I watched my flight push back and lift into a gray Pennsylvania sky, carrying my daughter toward a vacation whose entire purpose had just walked itself off the plane. My phone buzzed. Denise. Dad, so scared, hope you're okay, call us the second you land somewhere safe. Then again, then a third time. I turned the phone off, and the door opened. Dr. Okafor came in, still wearing her lanyard, but visibly off-duty now, her face gray, checking the hallway twice before pulling the door shut behind her. What I'm about to show you could end my license, she said, but I couldn't live with staying quiet either. She held up her phone with unsteady fingers and played a recording. She'd been in the pharmacy back room an hour earlier, restocking a shelf, when she overheard a phone call through the thin drywall. "It's your daughter," she said. The audio was tinny but clear enough. Denise's voice, calm and organized, unmistakably hers. The compound dissolves completely, no aftertaste, nothing shows on a standard screening. A pause, someone answering on the other end. Cardiac event mid-flight reads as natural causes. By the time anyone competent looks closer, the window's closed. Then, lighter, almost bored, 2:40. Craig's nervous, but he's on board. I listened to that recording 3 times, and each time I heard something new underneath it. The dosage math, the timing, the specific dollar figure attached to my own pulse. My voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. "Who was she talking to?" I asked. "I don't know, doctor," Okafor said. "But she said the plan was already moving, and that your son-in-law was fully aware of it." I looked at this stranger who had just detonated her own career to save a man she'd never met before that morning, and I asked her the only question that mattered. "Why would you risk everything for me?" Something old and raw crossed her face. "My father," she said. 4 years ago, my stepmother convinced him to change his will 2 months before he died, and the coroner called it a heart attack. And I knew in my gut, and I could never prove a single thing. Her jaw tightened. "I have stayed silent once in my life, Mr. Braddock. I am not doing it again." I wrote her number into a small notebook I still carry from my years on job sites, the same one I used to log crack widths and rebar spacing. We shook hands, and by the end hers had finally stopped trembling. "Stop them," she said. That was her whole goodbye. The cab ride home took 40 minutes through neighborhoods I'd known my entire adult life, and when the driver asked if I'd missed my flight, I told him no, I'd caught something instead. My house looked exactly the same from the curb. The same brick, the same dogwood tree I'd planted the year Denise was born. But when I unlocked my own front door, it felt like walking into a crime scene disguised as a home. Every room now carried a second history underneath the first. The plan had been whispered at that dinner table, refined in those bedrooms, seasoned right alongside the pot roast. I went straight into my study, pulled every file I owned, insurance, banking, deeds, and spread 38 years of my life across the dining room table in careful chronological order. A chain of custody for my own existence. Hours passed, and around midnight I found it. A beneficiary change form on my life insurance policy, dated 8 months earlier, moving the payout away from my younger brother's grandson, the boy studying to be a paramedic in Pittsburgh, and reassigning it entirely to Craig Whitfield. The signature at the bottom was a passable forgery of my own, except the capital W had a small extra flourish I have never once made in 67 years. I photographed it, and then I kept digging, and the floor kept dropping out from under me. Bank statements showing transfers I never authorized. $28,000 siphoned out in amounts small enough to avoid notice. A power of attorney form granting Craig financial authority, my forged signature at the bottom of that one too. And then the worst folder of all. Medical records from appointments I had never attended, describing a cognitive decline I have never experienced, memory lapses, disorientation, all of it fiction, all of it typed and formatted with the practiced ease of someone who'd built medical paperwork for a living. Denise had spent 9 years as a records administrator at a regional hospital network, and every drop of that training had apparently gone toward manufacturing a version of me that no longer existed. I stood alone in my dining room at midnight and said it out loud because saying it out loud made it real. They had spent months planning this while eating at my table, and I felt the initial shock burn off like a solvent evaporating, leaving behind something denser and colder underneath. They didn't know about the recording. They didn't know I'd found the paperwork. They didn't realize the sample they thought they were studying had started studying them right back. 3 days later, I sat across a mahogany desk from Miriam Castellano, an elder law attorney with 22 years of practice and a handshake like a closing argument, and I watched her professional composure fracture folder by folder. Forged beneficiary form, fraudulent power of attorney, fabricated medical decline. When she reached the medical records, she looked up and asked if my daughter worked in patient records. 9 years, I told her. Templates, systems, physician letterhead. Miriam exhaled slowly. She manufactured your incompetence, she said, while you were living in the same house. I did something then I won't pretend was entirely ethical. I handed her Craig's old laptop, the one he'd left charging in the guest room, whose password I happened to already know because I'd set it up myself 2 years earlier and he'd never bothered to change it. Deleted messages rose back to the surface. An exchange with someone calling himself a wellness consultant, discussion of a compound that stresses cardiac function and clears a routine toxicology screen, especially effective mid-flight, a price of $6,000 for consultation and supply, a meeting arranged in a strip mall parking lot 2 towns over. Miriam read through it in total silence, and when she finally spoke, her voice had gone flat. "Walter," she said, "your son-in-law priced your life like a used truck. Keep scrolling," I told her. "There's a will." There was a draft saved on the desktop, leaving everything to Denise and Craig Whitfield, my signature forged at the bottom, dated for a future they were confident I'd never see arrive. Miriam took off her glasses, rubbed her eyes, and asked me the question that shaped everything after. "When this is over, do you want justice or do you want revenge?" I didn't hesitate, because I'd already answered that question for myself in the dark 3 nights earlier. "I want them to understand exactly what they did," I said, "and I want consequences that outlast any apology they might offer." She nodded slowly. "Then we build this airtight," she said, "and we let them keep digging their own hole. 1 week, protective orders, account freezes, all filed with delayed notice. Act completely normal. And Walter," she added at the door, "they're going to panic when the locks engage." "Good," I said. "Panicked, people make mistakes." That night Craig texted, asking if we could talk soon about my future. I typed back 5 words. "Yes, we should discuss it." He read it as surrender. I meant it as the first line of an exam he didn't know he was taking. For the next 2 weeks I gave the performance of my life. I let my coffee go cold while staring at nothing. I asked which pills were mine while a small camera above the refrigerator recorded Denise handing them over with a satisfied little smile, telling me not to worry about a thing. I had installed 12 security cameras through a legitimate local company, and Craig and Denise had approved them enthusiastically, calling it smart thinking for an old man living alone with valuables in the house. They never once read the specifications closely enough to notice that every conversation in my living room was streaming to a cloud account only I had access to. I added one small enhancement of my own, a compact audio recorder tucked into the heating vent above the dining room, a trick I'd once used decades earlier to catch a subcontractor skimming material orders. Old habits, new stakes. It paid off within 2 days. Late one night, through my headphones upstairs, I heard Denise's voice, tight with fury. The trip was supposed to end this. Now we're back to nothing. And Craig, defensive, insisting the compound was supposed to be undetectable. And Denise, dropping into that flat, clinical register that frightened me more than any shouting ever could. Then we moved to Plan B. The incompetency angle. "Look at him lately," she said. "He's already halfway gone." I lay in the dark 1 floor above them, expressionless, recording every word, and I thought, not with rage but with something quieter and colder, "You are not watching me decline. You are watching me aim." The most dangerous work happened deep in the night, cloning files off Craig's laptop while he slept, an external drive slowly filling with evidence, One close call at 90% completion. When I heard footsteps creak in the hallway and had to slip out through the connecting bathroom, with the drive still in my pocket and my pulse hammering against decades of practice calm. In daylight, I built the legal fortress alongside Miriam, a new will, ironclad, executed in front of a notary named Patricia Alvarez, who read every clause aloud, recorded my declaration on video, took my fingerprints, and asked me directly whether my daughter would inherit anything at all. My son-in-law negotiated a price for my death, I told her, clear-eyed. He will receive exactly what he paid for. Every asset would go instead to a scholarship fund for first-generation engineering students at the State University, the fund named quietly for my late wife. Miriam gave me a small, prepaid phone in a parking garage, telling me if things escalated physically, one button connected directly to officers who'd already been briefed. I pocketed it, hoping I'd never need it, knowing I might. The account freeze hit on a Tuesday morning. I sat behind a newspaper I wasn't really reading, counting the minutes, letting the reaction build upstairs where Craig's laptop had begun chiming with error messages. Access denied. Account locked. Please appear in person. I filmed the whole thing from the hallway, unnoticed, and listened to his phone call curdle from confident to pleading. All third-party access suspended, he told Denise afterward, pending a fraud investigation. That evening I cooked pot roast myself, low and slow, the way I'd learned in the years after my wife passed, and served it to my would-be killers with perfectly steady hands. Somewhere between the potatoes and the silence, I mentioned, conversationally, that the bank had called about unusual activity on my accounts, and that I'd asked them to investigate thoroughly. Craig choked on his water. Denise's fork paused midair for exactly 1 second before she recovered and pushed back with the only tool she had left, telling me this was precisely why I needed oversight, that I was clearly getting confused. Oversight, I repeated, tasting the word. Interesting choice. Protection from what exactly? I asked mildly. Exactly from whom? The silence that followed answered for both of them. That night, the living room camera caught their entire strategy session in perfect audio, Denise pacing, insisting they needed medical power of attorney, that she still had contacts at the hospital who owed her favors, who needed money, and that once I was declared unfit, they would control everything, including whether any investigation into the accounts continued at all. And my son-in-law, nodding along, doing arithmetic in his head. I opened an old engineering notebook that night and wrote a single line. Sometimes the only way to teach the final lesson is to let the students fail the exam they wrote for themselves. Then I slept better than I had in weeks. A fake doctor called 2 mornings later, a pleasant voice claiming to be my longtime physician, inviting me in for a routine cognitive evaluation that afternoon, which was fascinating, since I hadn't had a primary care physician in over a decade. I agreed warmly, then called Miriam, who checked the license number and called back within 2 minutes to confirm it didn't exist anywhere in the state. I kept the appointment anyway, a small recorder in my shirt pocket, and found exactly what I expected, a rented office suite with a sign taped up overnight, and a stranger asking me questions engineered to make any answer sound impaired. I performed just enough confusion to keep him talking, recorded every word, and drove straight afterward to a real neuropsychologist, Dr. Elena Marsh, 30 years of forensic practice, who ran me through memory batteries and pattern tests for 2 full hours and told me flatly that my cognition was sharper than people half my age, no decline, no delusion, nothing. I drove home with her preliminary report on the passenger seat and found Craig's truck blocking my own driveway. He stood on the porch holding a manila envelope, wearing the look of a man who's decided his only move left is to bluff. "This is for your own good, Dad," he said, his hand shaking as he passed me the papers. I read every page standing right there in the driveway. A petition for guardianship, progressive memory loss, paranoid delusions regarding family, financial incompetence, a danger to himself. Sworn witness statements attached, along with a detailed psychiatric evaluation from a Dr. Priya Anand, a physician I had never once met in my life. I looked up at him and asked one quiet question. Whose safety is this really for, Craig? Mine or yours? He left without answering. That evening I walked the neighborhood with my old notebook, gentle as I'd ever been with anyone, and the witness statements began falling apart one by one. My neighbor Ruth wept on her porch, telling me Craig had said it was just paperwork to help with my care, that she'd seen me out in the yard late one night in my robe. That's all. 11 at night, I said softly, checking my new security cameras. He showed you exactly what he needed you to see. She promised to recant. So did 2 others. 3 more wouldn't answer their doors at all, and I learned later that Craig had paid them. 400 here, 200 there, testimony purchased at the price of a struggling neighbor's electric bill. At the preliminary hearing, the judge read both filings with open skepticism and ordered an independent evaluation by Dr. Marsh. Afterward, Miriam wanted to file everything immediately. Attempted murder, forgery, fraud, all of it, end it now. I shook my head. Not yet, I told her. If we move now, they lawyer up and stop handing us evidence. People reveal the most when they still believe they're winning. Let them keep writing their own confession, one piece at a time. Dr. Marsh's court-ordered report landed like a verdict ahead of the verdict. Full capacity, no decline whatsoever. Guardianship petition recommended for denial. That same afternoon, in Miriam's conference room, we assembled the entire case, a counterfiling running past 50 pages, detailing 16 separate criminal acts, boxes of exhibits organized by date. We file everything, Miriam said. Everything, I agreed. A process server rang my own doorbell that afternoon while I watched from across the street. Denise answered, and I watched her face perform its one honest sequence. Shock, recognition, fear, before she screamed for Craig, and their argument played out in silhouette against my living room curtains. That night my cameras caught the frenzy, Craig deleting files and attempting to wipe his hard drive with the clumsy urgency of a man who'd learned computers secondhand, Denise feeding documents into a shredder until it jammed, and then tearing pages apart by hand. Every deletion is a new charge, Miriam told me on the phone, watching the same feed. Obstruction. Consciousness of guilt. A settlement offer arrived within 2 days. Return the stolen money, vacate the house, waive all inheritance, accept a restraining order, in exchange for every criminal charge being dropped. I read it at the same dining room table where all of this had started and told Miriam they researched what stops a heart. They priced it. They booked the flight. This isn't a billing dispute. Schedule the trial. A second offer came weeks later, larger, delivered by Craig's mortified sister, with the word misunderstanding in its first sentence. I uncapped a pen and wrote one line across it in the same handwriting I'd used to sign off on load calculations for 38 years. Some things aren't for sale. See you in court. Their world came apart with the slow thoroughness of erosion. Craig's gambling debts surfaced through the filings, $60,000 across sports books and online poker, and once his creditors realized he'd inherit nothing, the calls escalated to visits, and his truck went back on a repossession trailer. Denise's employer opened its own investigation, found her fingerprints on unauthorized record access and fabricated documents, and ended 9 years of her career in a 15-minute meeting with a security escort. 2 of the paid neighbors came forward to recant. One of them, an elderly man on a fixed income, telling Miriam directly that Craig had assured him the signature was just a formality, but murder isn't paperwork. The trial filled early with media in the back rows, because a story like this doesn't stay quiet in a town this size. The prosecutor's opening was surgical. The defendants planned the death of Walter Braddock for insurance proceeds, researched the method, procured the substance, forged the paperwork, and boarded a commercial aircraft to carry it out. And the only reason the victim sat in this courtroom, instead of appearing in a coroner's file, was one pharmacist with a conscience and a phone. The lights dimmed, and Dr. Okafor's recording played through the courtroom speakers, and I watched 12 jurors hear my own daughter price my heartbeat at $240,000 in a voice as calm as a grocery list. Craig flinched. Denise stared at a fixed point on the far wall and didn't move for the entire 90 seconds. Dr. Okafor took the stand, and her voice shook for the first 4 questions before finding steady ground and holding it. I heard her plan a man's death like a work order, she said. I recorded it because I stayed silent once before, over my own father, and I have never stopped regretting it. On cross-examination, the defense pressed her about her own financial troubles, suggesting she'd fabricated the recording for attention. She leaned into the microphone and delivered the single sharpest line of the entire trial. My situation is exactly why I recognize desperation, and I still didn't let it turn me into an accomplice. A document examiner walked the jury through the forged capital W under 400 times magnification. The bank presented $28,000 of quiet theft, transfer by transfer. Dr. Marsh dismantled the incompetency narrative in under 10 minutes. The recovered messages scrolled across the courtroom screen, dissolve time, screening window, $6,000, while Craig studied his own hands under the fluorescent light. Then I took the stand myself. "When did you first suspect something?" the prosecutor asked. "When the free vacation arrived," I said, "after 10 months of near silence in my own house. In my old line of work, we called that an anomalous reading, and anomalous readings get investigated before you trust the structure. And what did you do about it?" "Exactly what I did for 38 years on every job site I ever ran," I said. "You document everything. You verify before you conclude. I simply never imagined the structure I'd be inspecting would be my own family." The jury returned in under 3 hours. Guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty of fraud, guilty of forgery. Each word landing on Craig like a physical weight until his head dropped into his hands, and one tear escaped down Denise's cheek before she wiped it away with a single knuckle. At sentencing, the judge asked if I wished to address the court, and I stood and faced the two of them and kept it short, because 38 years of running job sites taught me that brevity is what people actually remember. "You lived under my roof," I told them. "You ate at my table. You answered my trust with a dosage calculation. I don't hate either of you. I grieve you. You traded your whole lives for money you will now never touch, and that math is its own life sentence, whatever the judge decides to add to it." Craig received 12 years in state prison, with restitution and no possibility of early release given the aggravating circumstances. Denise received 9 years, her professional license permanently revoked, every inheritance right stripped, a lifetime restraining order following her out of that courtroom. The judge's closing words went into the transcript and into me at the same time. This was not a lapse in judgment. This was a business plan. Outside on the courthouse steps, I gave the cameras 11 words about trust and consequences, and declined to say anything further. Here's what this whole ordeal left me with, and I want to hand it to you plainly, because the lesson is the entire reason I'm telling you this story tonight. The mistake most of us make, especially those of us getting on in years, is believing that being loved and being watched closely are the same thing. They are not. Denise counted on the fact that a father will explain away almost anything to protect the picture he keeps of his own child. That kind of denial is the most reliable accomplice there is. What saved my life wasn't luck. It was one stranger who refused to stay quiet a second time, and a habit anyone listening tonight can start using today. So start it this week. Call your insurance company and ask them to read your current beneficiaries out loud to you. Ask them to flag your policy, so any future change requires your direct verbal confirmation. It takes 10 minutes, and most people haven't checked in over a decade, which is exactly what the people closest to them are counting on. Then sit with the harder question, the one I still turn over some nights in that same study. Of the people closest to you, who knows more about what your death is worth than about how your actual day went? Take your time with that one. I certainly have. And now, I'll turn it over to you, because I've argued with myself about my own choices for 2 years running. Tell me in the comments, 1. If you think I was right to go home that day and quietly build the case for weeks instead of calling the police immediately. 2. If you think I should have taken that recording straight to law enforcement that same afternoon before another hour passed. Or 3. If you believe I owed my daughter one honest conversation, face to face, before any of this ever reached a courtroom. Some nights, I'll admit, I still wonder. Tell me where you're listening from tonight and what time it is where you are. It still means something to me every single time I hear it. And if a stranger has ever stepped in to protect you when your own family wouldn't, or if you've ever caught that one wrong flash of emotion cross a familiar face, I want to hear about it below. Somebody watching tonight is sitting at their own dinner table right now, doing math they don't want to admit they're doing, and they need to know they're not imagining it. They're paying attention. If this one meant something to you, stay a while and subscribe. I've got a lifetime of these left in me, and this little corner of the internet only stays standing because people like you keep coming back to it. Thank you for sitting with me tonight. I'll see you in the next one.